We are excited to announce our new partnership with Sleeve, a top brand TCG accessories. Whether you are into One Piece, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, or you just have a favorite anime, this is the right place for you. And with the code HEAL5 or by shopping through the link down below, you'll get 5% of your order while also supporting our channel. Big thanks to Sleeve and to all of you for supporting us. Now back to the video.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. The first post-banlist tournament has recently come to an end, and we are here with the winner of the event, Enrico.
Yes.
And today Enrico will explain how to approach some of the deck's most important matchups. I'd also like to remind you that if you want to dive deeper, you can purchase his guide on Metafy. That said, let's move on to the matchups. The first deck that I'd like to talk about is Bonney. So how do you approach this matchup?
So first of all, I received a lot of questions about this matchup because I faced it a lot during the tournament. I had 2 in my Swiss rounds and then 1 in top 4. It's a very complex matchup, but I think it's complex from both sides. So a lot of people, they not feel confident against it with RAYLEIGH because it might be just too complex. So they just give up sometimes. They don't really know where to go, what to do. So let's say some general pro tips for the matchup are to understand at all times, for example, how many attacks are you gonna have next turn. So a lot of times it's important to develop your board based on also Bonney's effect. If they can, for example, rest one of your characters, you have to understand the next turn you need something to attack with. And sometimes it might be correct to not swing at all, because it's one of the most important things in the matchup is to understand always one turn in advance how are your attacks gonna look like next turn. So this is usually the general rule you have to apply each turn. For the early game, I think it's important to always develop. I'm not agreeing with people that they say, okay, just wait for the first rounds, just win with leader and then develop everything in one turn. I think most of the times is not correct, because it's better to not give up the 3 downs you have in the early game, but maybe it's better to just give up 1 attack. So I always try to invest as much downs as possible in the early game, because then you won't have enough in the late game since you have to push more. When it comes to the searchers in the early game especially, so you want to go second generally in the matchup, just because you're afraid of the 8-cost Mihawk. And that second is better because you can just develop the Luffy as soon as possible. The good thing about the matchup is that you can go really wide, and Bonney cannot really deal with multiple threats. So it's quite important to always start with as many pieces as possible, because you want to push a lot of 5 and 6s in the early game. If they take all the damage, then you can switch and try pushing more to avoid getting hit by 8-cost kids. Even though I think the kid now is a bit more complex to develop from Bonney, because some people, they don't even play the searchers, or like they usually don't have time to search it. So they either have it in their hands, or they won't be able to develop it. Also, you play Mulligan, so sometimes it's just you can just get rid of it with it. I think what most people fail to do is to understand when you can afford to Mulligan and when you can afford to swing with all your pieces, because since they play Carrot, I think Carrot is one of the most annoying pieces against Bonney. Sometimes people, they just swing blindly and then they get hit by Carrot, and then they enter in a loop where it's very complex to get out of. I think the general rule is to always play. I think the best way to play against Bonney is to understand the best turns for Bonney and play accordingly. So if you know, okay, next turn they will carrot my pieces, then you might just think about not swinging at all and just developing more. And then when you have, like, for example, 4 or 5 bodies on board, you can swing with everything in one turn. And usually in that turn, they cannot just take all the damage because they will go to 0. So they need to counter a little bit, take some. So they might just end up in a position that is weird for 8-cost kids. And also when it comes to Mulligan, I think it really depends on your board. I never Mulligan if my board is not full of 6Ks, for example. a lot of people, they fail to do that because they say, okay, my board is full of like 3Ks, I just buff one of them, I use one Don, and then I Morgan the carrot, for example. I think it's wrong to do that. Also, Cavendish is one of the pieces that I almost never Morgan. A lot of people, they just Morgan on Cavendish as soon as they see it, if they see the spot where there is no, like, for example, Kushiro or Tashiji. While it's wrong, because Cavendish doesn't really do anything during the mid game to late game. In the late game, it can be useful if they go with 10 cost Toffee and then they get back one Don. I mean, 2 Dons, but like you only are interested in the 1 Don that they're gonna use to just rest one of your guys. But to be honest, it's always my last priority to kill the Cavendish. If I'm really ahead on board, then I think about it. For example, if you went seconds, you already developed Luffy and Sanji, and you have like a bunch of searchers, like 4 pieces on board, then in that spot you can think about it. On 6 Dons, you can just Morgan something and then try to push in that turn, because then if they answer with carrot at 7 Dons is quite weak, because you can always protect the 3K with the Conqueror Saki, and then the carrot is not very useful, to be honest. I think a lot of people, they fail to protect also the 3Ks. It's quite important to protect every piece that you can. The 2Ks are the only ones that I never protect, but for example, when it comes to the 3Ks, if they swing with leader, I always Conqueror Saki, because I think against Bonney you cannot afford to just lose pieces freely. And since they almost never hit you, you have a lot of resources to use. And since your deck makes a lot of value, then it's just a slow grind. And probably the most important thing in the matchup is to understand which turn you have to switch from taking, like it's basically in the first part of the game you go with 5 and 6s a lot, because you want to check your opponent's hand, which counters do they have, and then from there you're getting a bit of value with wide attacks. And then there is usually one turn where you have to switch and go from the value taker game plan to aggro. When you get to that point, you have to really understand which turn is that. Is usually, most of the times, is before they reach 8 Dons, so they can 8 cost Mihawk, because once that card hit the board, then it's tougher to just aggro. And then once that card hits the board, then usually I switch to 5 and 8 attacks, so they don't get any value from my attacks. But yeah, it really depends on your board. You should always try and snowball the board. If you have like 3-4 pieces, think about saving some of them. Do not Morgan randomly, just think about, usually the Morgan, you use it to kill something that slows you down. So carrots, kids, Cavendish is usually the lowest priority. And yeah, just keep developing, and sometimes do not swing. If, for example, a lot of people ask me in the early game, when you start first, for example, if you develop one drop and then you have leader at 3 Dons, do they swing or not? You can swing if you develop 2 more pieces, because then you can give away that 1 searcher for free, but then you will have 3 pieces. You will have 2 pieces next, like for example Boa and a 1 drop, and then next turn you will have 2 attacks available. So that's really important to always have at least 2 attacks available. So the general rule is to try and end your turn with like 2 standing pieces, because most of the times doing that will prevent you from like them trading one, playing carrot to freeze the other one, doing a lot of things that can slow you down. So it's always important to have at least like leader and 1 piece to attack. So you can go with like double 6 and then develop board, and then next turn you have like 3 or 4 pieces, and then you can go like triple 6 or like 5, 6, 6 or something like that. So it's really important to try and understand when to not give value to the leader effect, when to Morgan, when to develop versus when to push, and then that 1 turn where you switch. I think that's the main thing. And then when they get to 0, they usually die unless they have kids. So always be careful about 10 cost Doffy as well. Don't just go blindly and say, okay, next turn I just win with my leader, because they might just play the 10 cost Doffy back to back a lot of times. But since Bonney doesn't aggro as much, they really need like double Doffy, double freeze, and then like try to finish the game off. I always try to hold a lot of Conqueror Saki for the late game, and Radical Beam as well. I play around Hodi as well a lot. Not during the mid game, because if they hit one life by themselves, it's usually a free damage for you. So you can switch one turn earlier on the aggro mode. But yeah, besides from that, also rush pieces are very important. I think Kid Killer is one of the best. If you can get them to 2 life, then it's gonna be one of the best pieces. Against especially the Bonney in top 4, I went second. I developed on 6 dawns double Zoro rush, and then on 8 dawns I was like assigning dawns, and then I went Kid Killer, and I was too fast for them. And then when they reached 8 dawns to play Kid, it was too late and they couldn't do anything. So I think that's the general rule. It's not easy. I think it's easier if you see someone playing, but it's indeed the complex. They also need to see the curve very well from Bonney's side. They need to see much better than you. You can see average most of the times, but the important thing is to see a lot of small pieces in the early game. Then the rest is fine.
That's a lot of information, and thank you so much. Great. Okay, the next deck that I want to talk about is Luffy UP. That is getting a lot of popularity in these few weeks because the leader is just that strong. So what do you think about the deck in general in the meta? Do you think that is a menace that will grow in time? And how do you play this matchup?
So I think Snakeman is still one of the best decks around. It reminds me of Duffy post-banlist. It was like a lot of people, they thought it was dead, but actually it was still a very good pick. I think the problem in my tournament was that there was not enough time to find the right build for Snakeman, and also that deck is let's say it's difficult to build, especially now, and you need to have a clear feel to build it very well. So the danger of bringing Snakeman to Bologna, for example, was that you could face whatever deck, and then if your build is not good enough, you would have lost. So I know a lot of people, they made X3 with the deck, and then some of them they played in Top Cut, so it was still a good call. I lost. My only loss in the tournament was to a Snakeman, actually, because what I said as well in my guide is that for me it's not an easy matchup. It's close to 50-50, but I don't feel that confident, at least with the build that I was running in that tournament. I didn't expect many Snakemen, so I was like, okay, I will probably face 1 or 2 max. So I was playing the Gatling for that, but then if we see an increase in popularity, I will maybe try and play the 2K Brooks again, maybe 2 Gatlings. It really depends on the meta. I think if it will become very popular, then it's better to switch to a more glass cannon build for RAYLEIGH. In general, the matchup is complex if they see the right, let's say, ramp curve, because then they accelerate too much. Usually if they get to 8 downs fast and they play the rush 8 cost Luffy Snakeman, then it's difficult because they can just bounce back one of the 4 cost Luffys, trade something else, and then when they reach 10 downs is very difficult. If they are still at 1 life, most of the times they can enter into a loop where they can just play Nami every turn, then stay with like 4 or 5 downs open, or like plays Rosinante, for example, stay with a lot of downs open, and then it's very difficult to push them because they can really block everything with the giant, and like the gear second and the Bagua is very complex. So what you usually want to do in that matchup is to go with a lot of 6s in the early game, try to push when they're they don't have any downs open. In that case, you want to go with 8s. If they have downs open, then you want to go with the 6s most of the times. Your objective is to put them at 0, of course. If you put them at 0 before they reach, let's say, the second or third turn where they can actually search with the leader, you should be fine. And then you should hold the Gatling, for example, or like the Armament Sakis for that part where you want to start swinging with the leader. Always try to remember that if they play, for example, Nami, and they stay with 5 down open and they have 0 life, don't just go all in. It doesn't make sense because most of the times they will just block. So it's very important to maybe take 1 extra turn to push it with many 6s, because then you can take some cards, or like you can force them to use giants. And then sometimes, because I played a lot of Snake Man, sometimes they will just reveal 5 cards. They won't see enough counters, and then you might just win the game there. So always be careful. Take that one extra turn to maybe punish their hand if they have too many giants or too many events. And then from there, you need to push. It's a clock that you have on your, like, basically when you sit down against Snake Man, your clock starts at turn 1. So you basically need to push as much as possible in the early game. Do not give up board. There is an argument now. A lot of people is trying to find new lines where you just push as much as possible in the early game. Maybe you go with just 2 attacks, but taller. So like you go with 2 8s instead of a lot of 6s, and then when you get to 8 dawns, you just develop double Luffy with double piece, usually a Sanjay if you have it, or boss. And then from there they will struggle because a lot of people, they cut the gravity blades, or like they won't be able to get rid of all those pieces. So that turn you might just push more. But it really depends on what you see. If you go first or second, I always prefer to go second. And Snake Man, I think they want to go second now almost in every matchup. So just keep that in mind as well. When you go second, it's easier for you because you can just develop a Luffy on curve. If they don't see God Thread, then you're very favored in that case. But if they see God Thread, it's going to be tough. So just develop a lot of 6s. A lot of times it's always good if they don't have dawns open to go 2 7s instead of 6 8s, because they might just take the 8 and counter the 6. So you want to take, for example, a 2k instead. Or sometimes you might just punish them because they don't have any 2ks in hand, and they might need to take double damage or like discard twice. So always try to end check your opponents. Also here, same as Bonney, try to play Snake Man a little bit to understand the feeling when you play against RAYLEIGH, the spots, what you like to do. It's always better, especially when you play decks like RAYLEIGH, to play some games in the other matchup. So if you play the other deck, usually you can find the spots where you say, okay, here if they aggro me, I'm very weak. So if you recognize those spots by playing the other deck, usually it's easier for you to understand when to swing, how much you want to swing, and that's for the boss. As I said before, I usually swing with them and I sacrifice them right away to just push more, because it doesn't make sense to hold on a 3k against a 6k leader because you won't be able to save it anyways. And usually against Snake Man, you don't need to have like 5 pieces on board. Differently from other matchups where you want to go, like, for example, very wide and go a lot of 5 and 6s. In this matchup, you cannot afford to do that because the matchup is too fast. So you just need, most of the times, you just need to hold at least 1 3k. And then the rest, of course, the 6ks you want to hold. But that, like, for example, if you have Boa, Buggy, and like Luffy, you swing with the Boa, you sacrifice, you assign down somewhere else, and then you swing with the other thing. No need to hold it there because it will just die. So yeah, it's basically understanding the clock differently from other matchups. You don't want to have this switch. It's aggro as from turn 1. You have a clock and you have to be as fast as possible. If they get to the Nami, if they stabilize basically with the Nami and 5 dawns open, it's going to be, there is no comeback from there. Unless they really reveal bad cards like twice. Like if they reveal 5, they reveal like terrible, and then they send on bottom, and they reveal again and they reveal terrible cards, then you might have a chance, but you don't want to get there.
Okay, the last matchup that I want to talk about is the mirror match, mainly because RAYLEIGH seems to be the best deck or between the top 3 in this format. So I think that the mirror match is really important. What you can say about the mirror match?
Mirror match is very skilled. There is a lot of people that think that whoever sees more Luffy is favored, but it's actually not true, because there is not really time in the mirror match to develop more than 1 Luffy most of the times. And it really depends how you play it, because a lot of people is still trying to figure out if it's better to go first or second. Personally, I've found myself better going first, because you aggro more. It's very aggro matchup. You need to push life, and that's it. You only want to trade the Sanjis most of the times, or the Luffy if your opponent is, I don't know, is misplayed and he assigned on somewhere that you can just get rid of them. If the Luffy becomes a 4k, you want to trade it, but usually if it's a 6k, it's difficult to trade it. Key cards for the matchup are just the Conqueror Saki, I think, and the Luffy's. Conqueror is, of course, the best card. You usually want to try and push in the early game, especially with a lot of 5s. 6 is always a bad attack in the mirror match. Also 7 is quite bad unless they don't have any dons open. So most of the times, your early game, you just want to develop a lot of pieces. If you got a free trade on a 2k or 3k without using leader effect or like a big guy, you can take it. For example, if they have a 2k rested, then you have a 2k, you can just swing 2 on 2 and that's fine, and 3k is the same. But most of the times you want to go face. What I usually do, I just take the first 2 damage, and then before going to 2 life, I hard counter. Because usually after the first 2 damage, you can start having at least 1 don open each turn. So you can rely on Conqueror Saki. Most of the times you won't even need to use it, but the fact that you have it available will force your opponent to play around it. So they will either go like 5s or 8s. And in that case, they won't be able to develop more or like push more. So it's really, you need that 1 don open to change your opponent's playstyle, because they cannot go 7s. The biggest mistake I see from a lot of players in the mid game, that is the most complex part, is that they just develop a lot. They rest all the dons, and then I just go with a lot of 7s. I put them at, for example, 2 or 1 life. If you get to 0 life, usually you die because we don't play blockers. And even if you do, they have the unblockable events. What is really important is Kid and Killer, I think, is one of the best cards, because that's also the reason why I don't want to go to 2, because if you go to 2, then it's dangerous, because if they force you to use the Conqueror Saki, then they can just develop a Kid and Killer and push 7 again, and it's very annoying, because then you also need to trade the body. It's a 5k, it's not easy to kill, and also they can just stay with 1 don open to play the Conqueror. The best way to approach the matchup is to just develop early game as much as possible and poke with the 5s. And then once you reach the mid game, you want to keep attacking depending on if your opponent has access to Conquerors or not. If they don't, you just push with 5s and 7s. If they have, then 5s are usually at premium. If you really want to put damage in, you want to go with an 8. Usually the best way to do it is like you just use leader effect on Sanji, becomes 8, you just wing. It's free, no dons needed. I just let it go when they try to trade the 3k. I just let it go most of the times because it's difficult to save. If they try and trade the Luffy, of course, I save it. What else? Sometimes it's also good to develop early rush Zoros. Usually 5k bodies are also quite easy to save, or they might just save you 1 life, so they're very good. And also here, when you reach that point where you need to understand how to switch, for example, from taking the value from your opponent's hand to aggroing, because if you aggro as from turn 1, they will just gather a lot of cards in their hand and they will hide behind Conqueror Saki. While if you need to get first some cards out of their hands, and most people, they will take the first 2 damage, so just go with the 5s. What is important is to not lose time in the matchup, or to not take like random damage. Sometimes you can just take the first 2 life, then you will see they will start going like 5 and 6s, or like 5 and 7s, and then you can afford to play maybe 1 Conqueror. But usually I keep at least 2 Conqueror Sakis for when I get to 1 life, because then you gain that 1 extra turn where you can basically turn the game around and go for lethal. So most of the times it's all about managing your dons, and do not neglect the board development. You can play 2 Luffys, but you still need to push in that turn. So especially if you already have a Luffy developed with something else, and you can go like 5-5-8, for example, or like 5-5-5, something like that, and then develop something else is important. But then next turn you will need to push a lot and maybe hide behind Conqueror Saki. I won a lot of matchups where I saw only 1 Luffy and my opponent saw 3, because sometimes they just overdevelop and like they play 3 Luffys, they lose those turns of aggro. So I just keep the Conquerors, and then even if they have like 3 6Ks, or 4-6Ks, they took too much damage, they go to 0, then next turn they try to finish the game, and then I have like 2 Conquerors in my hands, and then all the 6Ks are basically useless. So always be careful, do not overdevelop. Always keep a good balance of developing and pushing, especially if your opponent is not keeping the Dawn open in the mid game. Punish them. Go 7. The more you can push 7, the better, without of course neglecting the board. And a lot of people, they are like deceived by the fact that like their opponent will just play a lot of 3Ks, and they say, oh, they have board control, but actually the 3Ks are going to be useless because the matchup is very fast. You don't even get to 10 downs sometimes, and you cannot really afford to assign, for example, 2 downs to the 3Ks. So all these 3Ks are useless. Most of the times you only need 1. You only need 1 to push, and you just use leader effect there. You go 5. For example, a boa, you go 5, and then you sacrifice it and you buff something else. You go 7 or 8, and that's it. You don't need to overdevelop, and you need to recognize most of the times the most important thing is to understand how many turns are left in the game, or how many turns can you survive or your opponent can survive based on the Conqueror Sagis. I would test a lot the spots with Conqueror. I think that's the card of the matchup, and try to maximize the order of the attacks to, for example, starting with 5s is always better because you force them to use it as soon as possible. If you start with an 8 or a 7, they will just use it right away, and all your 5s will require 1 down, so it's gonna be worse. So always start with the 5s and then the bigger attacks. You go from low to high attacks usually. That's the best way to approach. But in general, the matchup is all about knowing when to counter, to not take too much damage, to not block too much damage, when to trade and what to trade. Most of the times it's Sanji, most of the times. All the rest you can ignore. But yeah, the 2Ks I almost never trade. The Luffy is too expensive to trade, so most of the times I just ignore it. And then Mulligan is quite useless in the matchup. A lot of people, they play the Mulligan because they think, oh, this is good, but actually you're losing the whole turn to trade a 6K that you can just block with 1 Conquerors. So it's kind of bait. You have to understand that it's all about Dawn management.
Okay, thank you so much for all this information and also a good fundamental lesson. So thank you a lot. I think that we covered all the most important matchup of the deck. I want to remember to the guys that are watching this video that Enrico released a guide on RAYLEIGH, and you can find it on his Metafy. And it's for sure a worth investment. You already know Enrico, he's a really good player. He just won the first OP12 tournament, so you can trust him. And thank you so much for your time, and see you in the next video. Bye!
Thank you.